Hi, the Recap Master here. At the start of the movie, we're introduced to James, a 14-year-old boy with the most troubled past in America. In the past 8 years, James has been institutionalized 3 times and boasts an extensive criminal record, including robbery, vandalism, and assault. Despite his violent history, James's mother, Tracy, believes her son has a bright future.
I'm not better than you, boy. I know nothing about you.
And tries to enroll him in a local high school. Sadly, the school's authorities are skeptical about accepting a juvenile convict with such a problematic background and turn down James's application.
That James has a record of unstable. He's been institutionalized 3 times in 8 years.
Tracy tries her best to encourage the teenager, but the rejection disheartens James, and he falls into a depression. Later that night, the boy heads to the grocery store to get some milk and runs into Crystal and Manny, 2 delinquent minors with equally troubled pasts. While James quietly surveys the store, Crystal and Manny shoplift and throw some items on the teen before making a run for it. The store manager spots James with his goods and tries to attack him, but the teenager freaks out and dumps milk on him before joining Crystal and Manny to flee the scene. After the trio escapes, they hit things off and get high together. James takes a liking to Crystal and Manny and wishes to spend the night with them. However, the ex-convict is still on probation and has an ankle monitor that ensures he's indoors before curfew, and as a result, James returns home but plans to meet his new friends the following day. The next morning, the trio reunites and persuades a young girl to let them into her family home. Once inside, the delinquent teens drink alcohol and steal some jewelry. After they leave, Crystal and Manny tell James about their boss, Rock, a notorious drug lord. Crystal wants to introduce James to Rock, but the drug kingpin only operates at night, and the teen can't stay out late thanks to his curfew. Later that day, James returns home and watches TV with his sister. Meanwhile, Tracy cleans the house and finds empty alcohol bottles in her son's room. Tracy views this as a relapse and gets extremely mad at James. Furious, the concerned mother yells at him to abandon his delinquent lifestyle. However, this has the opposite effect as it merely frustrates James and pushes him over the edge. The ex-con disregards his probation rules and clips off his ankle monitor before storming out of the house. Left with nowhere else to go, James seeks out Rock. He locates the drug lord and asks him for a job. Skeptical, Rock refuses and orders James to leave his house. However, the teenager refuses to budge and doesn't take no for an answer. Rock is impressed by James's stubbornness and eventually changes his mind. The drug lord allows the ex-convict to join his crew and lets him move into his apartment. The following day, James calls his mom via a payphone and tells her he's not coming home. Right then, Tracy reveals that the cops are looking for him and begs James to return home. Sadly, the teenager is hell-bent on his decision and sticks with Rock's crew. Later that night, James goes on his first mission and drives Rock and Manny to a residential building. The group plans to rob a gang and stations James outside as the getaway driver. Meanwhile, Rock and Manny break into the building to enact their mission. Minutes after they break in, James spots a man circling the building and racing to the backyard. Concerned for his teammates, the teen follows him and sneaks into the house. Inside, he finds 2 thugs holding Rock and Manny at gunpoint. While the men focus on James's teammates, the teenager grabs a pan and attacks them from behind. The thugs get distracted, and Rock seizes the opportunity to shoot one of them in the leg, while James takes out the other. The group eventually grabs a bag full of cash and drugs before making a getaway. Grateful for James's help, Rock takes the young man to the club and rewards him with a wad of cash. Later that night, James hangs out with Crystal, and the duo shares a heartfelt moment. James tells her about his family and reveals how his mom struggled to make ends meet over the years. Despite his sad past, the teen doesn't let it get to him. And the next day, James and Crystal head to a local store. There, James meets Sarah, the store owner's daughter. They both eye each other lustfully. However, Crystal butts in and drags James before things get intense. Weeks into working for Rock, the drug lord takes James as his most trusted employee and sends him on even more dangerous jobs. Soon, the teen scales through the ranks, and a life of crime becomes his new normal. One day, Rock sends James and one of his boys to complete a deal with a mafia boss. Seeing how young the boys are, the crime lord doesn't take them seriously and calls off the deal. This hurts James's ego, and the delinquent teen gets angry and pulls a gun on the mafia boss. Despite this, the crime boss appears unfazed, and this only aggravates James even more, urging him to shoot a warning shot at a nearby lamp. A stripper observing the exchange screams, and James tries to shut her up. However, the sounds attract the boss's guards as two hefty men storm the room and knock out James and his colleague. After getting a thorough beating, the teenager grows even more furious and vows to get his revenge. He finds the boss's car and uses a crowbar to smash his windows before stealing a bag full of ammo. James eventually returns to his room, and Crystal helps clean his wounds. She reprimands him for taking stupid risks and scolds him for letting his ego get the better of him. James gets triggered, and the couple gets into an argument that ends with the ex-con storming out of the room. He marches to the store for beer and runs into Sarah again. Livid, he yells at her but quickly calms down and apologizes for raising his voice. Sarah forgives him, and the two teenagers sit on the store floor while sharing a drink. James enjoys his time with the store owner's daughter but returns to Rock's apartment after some time. Once he enters the building, he finds the drug lord waiting for him. Rock is fuming with anger and reprimands James for attacking his business partner. Thanks to the teen's stunt, the mafia boss and Rock now have a rocky relationship and can no longer do business together. The drug lord pins James to the wall and points a gun to his face while yelling at him.
Shut the fuck up! No, shut up!
The teenager tries to defend his actions and reminds Rock that he recovered a bag full of ammo. However, the drug lord is unimpressed by this and quickly shuts him down. Rock explains that selling ammo is a terrible business, as guns are easily traceable and can lead the feds back to them. Hence, the guns James stole were not only useless, but a liability. The young teen feels terrible for letting Rock down and promises to fix things. The next day, James returns to the store to look for Sarah. He finds her dad manning the store, and together, the two teenagers walk around town. The duo takes the opportunity to bond, as both parties share intimate details about their lives. James gets vulnerable and confesses he's been institutionalized since he was 6. The juvenile criminal notes that he was an angry kid and often got into fights from an early age. Sadly, that came with dire consequences, as everyone treated him like a lost cause from that point onwards. As a result, he's never had the chance to attend a regular school or live a normal life. Sarah sympathizes with his plight, and eventually, the conversation takes a romantic turn when James calls her pretty. Minutes later, the two teens head to Sarah's house and watch a movie together. Meanwhile, back at Rock's apartment, the drug lord and Crystal hook up. The following day, James visits Sarah at her school, and she introduces him to her friends. The boys invite him to play basketball, and James instantly hits things off with them. Albeit brief, James gets a taste of a normal high school experience. In the middle of the game, he takes a break to check in on Sarah, and she pecks him on the cheek. After the game, James and Sarah stroll around town and hang out in a deserted field. There, James vows to take Sarah away from their little town and give her a better life. The couple shares a romantic moment and eventually has their first kiss. Thanks to the fun afternoon, James has a change of heart and decides to abandon his life of crime. He returns to Rock's house and packs all his belongings. The teenager moves to leave but runs into Crystal, who tries to stop him. She desperately tries to get under his skin and tells him she hooked up with Rock. However, James doesn't fall for her antics and leaves the house anyway. As he walks down the street, the teenager runs into Rock. The drug lord is sad to see one of his most trusted boys leave, and guilt trips James into staying. He plays on the teen's fragile ego and convinces him to complete one last job for him later that night. For his final mission, Rock asks James to fix his previous mistake by selling off the guns to a rival gang. The troubled kid reluctantly agrees and heads with Manny to an abandoned park to sell off the stolen ammo. James has a bad feeling about the deal, but Manny assures him everything will be fine. Minutes later, 3 rival gangsters arrive and check the guns. After confirming they're valid, they try grabbing the ammo before paying. Weary of their suspicious moves, James points a gun at their face and insists they pay first. However, Manny calms the teen down and allows the men to take the guns to their car. Once they return to their vehicle, the gang opens fire at the boys, forcing James and Manny to take cover behind their car. The men try to drive off with the guns, but luckily, James and Manny manage to stop them after firing some shots at the car. The driver gets injured and crashes the vehicle into a nearby gate. James and Manny head to the car to recover the guns. However, the cops arrive before they can retrieve the ammo, and the boys make a run for it. On the officer's arrival, Manny suggests they leave town since the cops will run their car's plate number and trace it back to them. However, James refuses to leave while Manny flees the scene. When the teen returns to Rock's house, he watches from a distance as the cops arrive and arrest the Kingpin and Crystal. Scared, James races to Sarah's house and frantically knocks on her door. When she opens up, he asks her to pack her things and follow him out of the city to start a new life somewhere else. Sarah is skeptical about the idea and refuses to leave. The young girl tearfully apologizes, returns inside, and shuts the door in James's face. Disappointed, the teen walks away and heads back to his family home. The house is empty, and minutes later, the cops raid the area and arrest him. Years later, James turns 18 and is transferred from juvie to an adult detention center. Chris, a scrawny-looking inmate, also gets transferred to the facility. On entering the yard, Chris discovers multiple eyes are on him and realizes they're all staring at him due to his small physique. Guillermo, a prison bully and gang leader, approaches the new inmate and tries to intimidate him. James, who's been watching from the sidelines, intervenes and confronts Guillermo head-on. The prison bully doesn't take kindly to James's rebellion, and tension quickly brews between the two inmates. Pissed, Guillermo tries to punch James, but the guards notice this and fire warning shots to de-escalate the situation. Everyone in the yard gets down, and the guards manage to get things under control. After the incident, Lieutenant Fulton, the prison warden, scolds the involved inmates and warns them to stay out of trouble. While James heeds his advice, Guillermo has other plans. The next morning, the inmates are ushered into the bathroom for a shower. There, Guillermo sees a perfect opportunity to teach James a lesson and whips out a blade to attack him. Chris spots the gang leader approaching and yells for James to watch out. Luckily, the inmate reacts just in time and narrowly dodges Guillermo's strike before hitting him in the face. The attack forces the gang leader to drop the knife, but the squabble is far from over. Guillermo's men quickly join the fight, and all hell breaks loose. A couple of Guillermo's gang members grab the knife and stab Chris in the gut multiple times, while others grab James and give him a thorough beating. Minutes later, officers storm the room and separate the fight. Chris gets rushed to the medical unit while the rest of the inmates are summoned for questioning. Fulton interrogates James and asks who brought the knife into the shower. However, despite being attacked, James refuses to snitch on the inmates and doesn't rat Guillermo out. Realizing the convict won't budge, the guards return James to his cell after keeping him in solitary confinement for a few weeks. Once he's back in his cell, James feels unusually chatty and tries to befriend Conrad, a calm but scary-looking inmate with a life sentence. Conrad is initially stern and dismissive. However, the scary-looking inmate eventually warms up to James, and the duo becomes friends. One day, James tells Conrad that he plans to take revenge on Guillermo for the bathroom attack. However, the new friend advises James against starting a fight and urges him to stay out of trouble so he doesn't prolong his sentence. The following day, James's mom comes to visit him. After exchanging pleasantries, Tracy tells her son he has 5 weeks until his parole hearing. Though James doesn't have the best criminal history, his mom hopes he'll get pardoned. After the visit, the inmate is on edge about his hearing and grows anxious as the D-Day inches closer. James starts writing poetry to process his emotions and keep himself out of trouble. Days later, Chris is finally discharged from the medical unit and enters the yard. Still recovering, the injured inmate sits on the floor while Guillermo stares at him from a distance. James notices this and walks over to Chris. He forces the injured inmate to stand up and walk around to avoid looking weak. While they stroll around, Chris reveals that his girlfriend of 2 years just dumped him. James sympathizes with him and confesses that a girl he liked also stopped talking to him once he got into jail. While the two men bond over their rough love lives, Chris admits he's scared of remaining in that prison. Thanks to Guillermo. Fortunately, the recovering inmate has a parole hearing in a few days, so James tells him to keep his head down until then. The inmate takes his advice, but James still worries about him and requests a meeting with Lieutenant Fulton. Once the prison warden arrives, James begs him to put Chris in protective custody until his hearing. Fulton agrees to do it, but only on one condition. James would have to reveal the identity of the person who smuggled a knife into the bathroom. The inmate is concerned for Chris's safety, but his loyalty stops him from snitching on Guillermo. When Fulton realizes James won't cooperate, he denies his request, and Chris is left to fend for himself. Though James didn't snitch, Guillermo receives word that he met with Fulton. The following day, the gang leader confronts the teenager and threatens to unalive him if he talks. James doesn't back down from the threat and faces Guillermo head-on. Realizing the inmate has a hearing in a few days, the gang leader tries to bait him into starting a fight. Guillermo dares James to hit him, but the inmate refuses to fall for his scheme and decides to walk away. Days later, Chris's hearing finally arrives. Sadly, he doesn't get the verdict he was hoping for. Rather than get released, the convict's sentence is extended by 6 extra years. Chris is devastated by the ruling, and James is also disheartened for his friend. The following day, the cops escort the prisoners out of their cells. Once outside, Chris whips out a rope made of bedsheets, ties it to his neck, and latches it onto a railing. The inmates around start cheering him on as Chris climbs over the platform and threatens to commit the unthinkable. While the other inmates urge him to jump, James and Fulton yell at him to get down. Chris spares a minute to second-guess his decision, but refuses to budge from his position. Concerned, James runs through the crowd to save his friend. However, before he can reach him, James shoves an officer and gets held down for stepping out of line. Seeing this, Chris capitalizes on the chaos and jumps, ending his life. While an officer gets Chris down, Fulton confronts James and blames him for the tragic incident. Feeling guilty, the inmate beats himself up for protecting Guillermo and immediately loses his cool. Wasting no time, he races toward the gang leader, tackles him to the ground, and begins hitting him. Fulton struggles to hold back James, but the inmate hits him in the face out of anger, causing his nose to bleed. Another officer intervenes and holds down James, stopping his rampage while an injured Fulton sends him to solitary confinement. 2 weeks later, James's parole hearing is a couple of days away. Fulton is summoned for a preliminary hearing, where a panel rehashes the inmate's past crimes, including his violent fits in jail. The prison warden feels sorry for James and tries to argue in his defense, but the inmate's terrible record makes it borderline impossible. The next morning, James returns to the yard. Rather than prepare for his hearing, the inmate loses all hope of getting a pardon and instead plays ball in the yard. He almost gets into a fight with another inmate, but Conrad breaks it up and encourages James not to give up. The scary-looking man tells James that he only has to plead his case properly and convince the panel to give him a second chance, despite his troubled history. When the inmate refuses to listen, Conrad shows him tough love, grabbing him by the neck and slapping some sense into him. The following day, James finally gets his hearing. He follows Conrad's advice and pleads his case as best as he can. He speaks from the heart and talks about Chris's untimely passing. He takes full accountability for his crimes, but also explains in detail how the system failed him and shaped his bleak future from an early age. James's speech greatly moves the panel, and surprisingly, they pardon his crimes and order his release. The next morning, James walks out of prison a free man and bids Conrad goodbye. He finds his mom and sister waiting for him outside and gives them a big hug. Weeks later, he gets a job as a motel clerk and struggles to make ends meet. He tries to get a better job, but his felony background makes it borderline impossible. One day, a drug-dealing acquaintance finds James and offers him a job as a drug smuggler. Frustrated with his lackluster earnings, the ex-con initially rejects the offer, but reconsiders and takes it. However, James recalls his time in jail and decides to abandon his life of crime for good, ultimately turning down the job. Days later, the ex-con misses Sarah and heads to her family's house to see her. There, he learns from her dad that she doesn't live there anymore and has moved to the suburbs. After getting her new address, James knocks on her door, and Sarah is shocked to see him. She hugs her old friend, and the duo shares a drink while they catch up on their respective lives. Sarah tells James she's engaged and apologizes for not visiting him in jail. The ex-con bears no grudges and tells her she made the right choice by moving on. During their conversation, James confesses he's tired of living in their old town as parts of his past constantly try to rope him back to his abandoned life. The ex-con reveals he plans on moving to New York City and reads her a poem he wrote while in jail. Months later, James moves out of his mom's house and rents his own place. The movie ends with the ex-con saving bits of his salary as he hopes to fulfill his dream of starting a new life in New York City. If you enjoyed this movie recap, please like the video and comment below what movie we should recap next. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. And until next time, guys, I will see you in the next one. Take care.